The roost is not where you think it is. It is nearly 9 inches the evening in late October, and the last cardinal has gone silent at the feeder. The sky above the suburban yard is the color of wet slate, somewhere in the dense privet hedge along the fence line. 3 Carolina wrens have pressed themselves shoulder to shoulder into a hollow no larger than a coffee mug. They are not in the nest box you put up for them. They are not in the brush pile. They are inside a rolled-up section of garden hose hanging from a nail on the side of the shed, and they have been sleeping there together every night for the past 6 weeks. Most people assume their backyard birds simply vanish into the trees at dusk and reappear at dawn. They do not. The places small songbirds choose to sleep are deliberate, defended, and in many cases shared with other individuals in a way that looks almost domestic. The Carolina wren, in particular, does something at night that contradicts almost everything casual birders believe about songbird behavior. It huddles, it pairs. It tucks itself into spaces so specific that researchers have spent decades cataloging the geometry of the cavities it prefers. And it does all of this within a few yards of the back door. In spots, the homeowner walks past every morning without ever realizing what was inside the night before. The roosting behavior of this species was studied in depth by Bernard Lohr. Colleagues at the University of Maryland, building on earlier field notes that go back to the 1930s. What they found is the answer you came here for, and it changes how you will look at your hedge tomorrow morning. Subscribe before you leave, because the second half of this investigation involves a number that almost no one who feeds these birds has ever heard. Begin with the behavior itself. A Carolina wren weighs about 20 grams. In a northern winter, on a clear night with the temperature near 0 degrees Fahrenheit, a bird that small loses body heat at a rate that should not be survivable. By every thermodynamic measurement, a solitary wren sleeping alone in an open branch should not see morning. And yet, the species persists. It persists in Maryland, in Ohio, in southern Michigan, in places where the winters were once considered too severe for it. The expansion of its range northward over the last 70 years is one of the best documented shifts in North American ornithology. Tracked through Christmas bird count data going back to the 1940s, the first explanation offered, going back to early naturalist accounts, was that the wren simply tolerates cold better than its size suggests. This turned out to be wrong. Metabolic studies showed the wren is no more cold-hardy than other birds of similar mass. Its body cannot generate enough heat through shivering alone to survive a sub-zero night exposed to the air. Something else has to be happening. The something else is the cavity. And not just any cavity. In the 1980s and 1990s, ornithologists working in the eastern United States began systematically mapping where Carolina wrens slept. The cavities were never random. They were small enough that the bird's body nearly filled them, which reduces the volume of air that needs to be warmed. They were oriented away from prevailing wind. They were often above ground but rarely high. And in roughly a third of the documented winter roosts, the cavity contained more than one bird. This is the part of the story that most backyard birders have never heard. Carolina wrens, which are fiercely territorial during the breeding season and will sing at each other from opposite sides of a yard for hours, regularly share sleeping cavities in winter with their mate, their offspring from that year, and occasionally unrelated individuals. The huddle is not affection, it is thermoregulation. 2 birds pressed together lose less heat than 2 birds apart. The math of that difference is what allowed the species to push north into climates that should have stopped it. Margaret Morse-Neese, whose decades of work on song sparrows in the 1930s remains foundational, observed this kind of communal roosting in other small passerines. Noted in her field journals that the cavities chosen were so specific, the birds clearly remembered them across seasons. Modern radio telemetry work has confirmed what she suspected. Individual wrens return to the same roost cavity night after night, sometimes for an entire winter, sometimes across multiple years, which is when the question shifted. Not where do they sleep, but how do they choose? A study published in the early 2000s, using miniaturized temperature loggers placed inside known wren cavities, recorded internal temperatures during winter nights when the outside air dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. The temperature inside an occupied cavity, with 2 birds present, stabilized at nearly 20 degrees warmer than the air outside. The wrens were generating, between their 2 small bodies, a microclimate that turned a garden hose, a flower pot, a folded patio umbrella, into a survivable shelter. 20 degrees, 2 birds, 1 coiled garden hose. That is the chalk anchor of this investigation, and it is the number worth repeating. The species that sings in your yard in April and defends a quarter-acre territory against its own kind is the same species that, in January, will press itself against another wren inside a cavity smaller than your fist. Together they will lift the temperature of that cavity by 20 degrees through nothing but the heat of their own bodies. And here is the part that no one wants to think about. The roost is not chosen at random, and it is not chosen the night of. The wrens scout. Throughout the autumn, as the days shorten and the insect supply collapses, individual Carolina wrens investigate dozens of potential cavities in their territory. They enter, they turn around, they leave. They test. They remember. By the time the first hard freeze arrives, the bird already knows where it will sleep, and it knows the second and third options if the first is disturbed. The hose on your shed was not a lucky accident. It was selected, weeks earlier, by a bird that had walked the perimeter of your yard while you were not watching. Return now to the scene at dusk. The privet hedge against the fence, the shed with the coiled hose. The wren you have not seen since the last suet feeding at 4 inches the afternoon. It is inside the hose. It is not alone. Its mate is pressed against its left flank. The cavity between them holds a pocket of air warmer than the October night outside, by a margin that is keeping both of them alive. The bird has been mapping your yard since September. It knows the angle of the wind off your house. It knows which side of the shed warms first in the morning sun. It chose the hose deliberately, after testing the wreath on your front door and the watering can by the spigot, and finding them inferior. You have been sharing your yard, this whole time, with a bird that has been studying it more carefully than you have. In the morning, when the wren slips out of the hose before sunrise, lands on the fence post to sing the first 3 notes of its territorial song, you will hear it the way you have always heard it. But you will know now that the song is coming from a bird that has just emerged from a cavity it selected, defended, and shared through a night that should not have been survivable. The roost is not where you thought it was. The bird is not who you thought it was. If you have ever found a Carolina wren in a strange spot around your house, inside a garage, behind a shutter, in a hanging basket tucked into a coiled extension cord, tell me where in the comments. I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.